2 Timothy 4:2. Preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, rebuke, correct, and encourage with great patience and teaching. Using the Bible Study Essentials method, let's just walk through this scripture together. Now, by way of reminder, let's remember that the steps for the Bible Study Essentials are 1, observation, or what do you see? 2, interpretation, or what does this mean? And 3, application, or what am I going to do with this truth? These steps and their order is important so that we stay on good, safe ground. Before we just start applying things or seeking the principle, we need to observe and see what it says, what was it intending to say, what does it mean, what words are there, and then we work to find the interpretation or find the timeless principle, and then we apply it. So let's go ahead and start with step 1, observation. What do you see? And as we do this, it would be wise to say, what can I learn about God in this text? What can I learn about man in this text? What does this scripture that I'm studying or reading tell me about God's redemptive plan or the gospel? What are some things I see? Do I see repeated themes? Do I see movements? Do I see repeated words? We just want to get in this thing and start working. But it's very, very important to remember that what I'm seeing here in front of me is a single sentence, and a single sentence is not the primary unit of thought in Scripture. That is for the paragraph. This is just one verse, and so we probably need to remember that it's in a paragraph. The paragraph is the primary unit of thought. Context is incredibly important, and that paragraph will help us know the context. And then the paragraphs before and after it are going to help. The things before the chapter and in the rest of the chapter. And let's remember that this is a letter, and I see that it's written at the beginning of this. It says to Timothy from Paul. Paul, I know, is training up this young pastor, Timothy. And then we should ask ourselves, where does this fit in the big story of the Bible? Well, it's in the New Testament. It's after Christ's death, burial, and resurrection and ascension in to sit at the right hand of the Father. And so I know that this is now in a section where the gospel is being spread throughout the world. And this is in one of Paul's writings, and he's encouraging this pastor. So that's very helpful. So knowing who this is to and what the context is very helpful. Now, I said it'd be good to look at this within the paragraph, and so I have provided that here. I've typed it out so we could look at it. This is the CSB translation. And wow, right off the bat, I notice that the verse I'm actually looking at that we're studying together is not the first or the last. It's actually buried right in here as the second sentence in this verse. And so we go to read it and we say, okay, I solemnly charge you. Now this I is Paul. This you is Timothy. So Paul is solemnly charging Timothy. Okay, there's a charge, an instruction, a challenge, a command, an imperative, which seems to match this beginning imperative of a verse. Preach the word. Okay, so Paul charges Timothy to do this, and then we should probably think, okay, what does preach mean, and what does the word mean? We could do word studies. We'd see things like preach has this aspect of proclaim, herald, and I go, okay, that's really helpful to know that word in a little bit more detail. And what is this thing with the word? We're going to come back to that. And then that's curious. Be ready in season and out of season. Okay, so kind of a be ready all the time, but is there more there that I should explore? And then we have these lists: rebuke, correct, and encourage. Okay, and how am I going to do it? It says here with great teaching, and I didn't type this out. The verse actually says, let's go back up, with great patience and teaching. And so down here in my typed version, I don't have that. I probably should have cut and paste directly from Scripture. Anyway, so I have some how to. And then we read this thing. It says, for a time will come when people will not tolerate sound doctrine, but according to their own desires will multiply teachers for themselves because they have an itch to hear what they want to hear. Now, I saw a couple of things. This for, what's going on? Struggling here. What is going on with this for right there? Okay, it's kind of a because, or here's a reason. So why would we preach the word? Well, a time is going to come. And I just remember reading this thing about season, in season, and out of season. And so if we're talking about season, there's going to be a season that will come when people will not tolerate, oh, wait a minute, sound doctrine seems to connect, and I've kind of got a mess here. Let's switch colors here for the word. Seems like this connects. They're not going to tolerate it. That's what I'm preaching. So the word, and probably ought to work through what that means. And oh yeah, before we got to this in the previous chapter, I remember reading a verse many people have memorized, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16. For all Scripture is breathed out by God, or all Scripture is inspired by God, and it is profitable for teaching, for rebuking, for correcting, and training up in righteousness. And then verse 17, so the man of God, which is maybe Timothy or those who are hearing the Scripture, may be complete and equipped for every good work. There's another list there, rebuking, correcting, training, and that's Scripture. So it seems that that is the word, Scripture. And then we're going to be ready to preach it in season, out of season. And then we continue on. They're not going to tolerate sound doctrine. And then it says, but according to their own desires will multiply teachers. And wow, there is something else I saw. We're going to have this teaching piece, and they're going to multiply teachers. Okay, that's interesting. They're going to multiply teachers for themselves. Why? Because they have an itch to hear what they want to hear. They will turn away from hearing the truth. Oh, and they will turn aside to myths. It seems like this truth is also tied to the word. So the word seems to be tied to this sound doctrine, to the truth. And we need to teach this, or Timothy is in charge to teach this, because others will multiply teachers for themselves. And then it says, but as for you, exercise self-control in everything you do, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, and fulfill your ministry. Okay, very helpful there in context as we go back and we say, okay, now that I've done step 1, okay, and we could do so much more. We could do all kinds of word studies that we can go into all kinds of depth on what we're understanding. We could even go now and maybe read a little bit of commentary to see what's here. We could just really continue to make observation after observation after observation. We'd see things like, well, this should be encouraging, and there should be great patience, and this looks like something where what we're speaking, we just go on and on and on and on. So now we need to get to step 2. That's where we're going to be at now. And step 2 is interpretation. What does it mean? What's the timeless principle? Well, obviously, we're reading Timothy's mail, and this isn't just for curiosity's sake. This is so we can learn, because all Scripture is good for teaching and rebuking and correcting, and this is Scripture. And so we go, okay, wow, if it's good for Timothy to do this, then it's probably good for all preachers and pastors to do this. But if it's good for all teachers and pastors to do this, then it's probably good for the Sunday school teacher to do this. And doesn't it seem like if it's good for this to happen in Sunday school, that it's good for it to happen in our home as we're teaching our kids? And if it's good to be happening with our kids, then it's probably good as we're hearing the Word and reading the Word and studying it, that we're preaching the Word to ourselves and that we're preaching it to lots. We're like, wow, maybe this applies to all who want to be faithful in following Jesus and serving Him in their ministry. So a timeless principle could be that all Christians should preach the Word always, or be ready to preach it, whether the church is in favor or out of favor. And then we have some instruction, since this applies to Christians, that the Word will have an impact where it will rebuke, correct, and encourage. And then we need to do this as we proclaim or speak, as we preach this Word. We need to do it with great patience and teaching. Okay. If that's what we get out of the Scripture, and we could get lots of things if we continue to study this, but for now, that looks like a pretty solid interpretation from what we've observed. Now we need to go to step 3, which is this big question. What am I going to do with this truth? Here's this timeless principle that Christians should speak the Word, and if I'm a Christian, if you're a Christian, if we're Christians, then we should be proclaiming the Word. Are we? Yes or no? Is there something that we need to do? And if we are we doing it correctly? We're doing it with great patience and great teaching? And are we depending on the Word through all of it so that it will do what it says it does? Is the Word going to do this work as I teach with great patience and teaching? 2 Timothy 4:2. Preach the Word, be ready in season and out of season, rebuke, correct, and encourage with great patience